Chapter 9, Inheritance and Interfaces, Part 3. So it's a common error to replicate instance variables from the superclass, and you don't need to do that. In fact, a subclass cannot directly access private instance variables in the superclass. So you have to use the public interface of the superclass to access those instance variables that are private in the superclass. So if you try to fix the problem by creating a instance field with the same name in the subclass, it creates a second copy just with different scope. And so it's like having now two copies of the same of what's supposed to be the same variable, but they're separate, so they're going to have different values in them. So avoid the temptation to just make it work by declaring the variable in the subclass. That's not going to make it work. Look at this little example of what that does. Choice question then has a copy of text and answer from the superclass and choices and text from the subclass, which is not what we want. It's also common to confuse super and subclasses. The use of the terminology super and sub may be confusing, which is why I like to draw a little UML diagram and even label super at the top and sub underneath it. The subclass choice question is an extended and more powerful version of question. It's more specific, less general. Is super a version of question? No. Choice question is a version of question and not the other way around. Super and subclass terminology comes from set theory. So if you know anything at all about set theory, and think back to maybe learning about Venn diagrams and maybe having this terminology pop up then, choice question is one of a subset of all objects that inherit from question. So question is the superset. So if you think of a set of something like students at Xavier, a subset would be freshmen at Xavier, would be a subset of all students at Xavier. Overriding methods. So the choice question class needs a display method that overrides the display method from the question class. And why is that? It's because the choice question class has this little array list with all the different options for answer. And if we rely on the display method in the superclass, it can't handle that list. So we need to override it in the subclass. They are two different method implementations, although they have the same name and they accept the same parameter list. The question display in the superclass, the display method in the superclass displays the instance variable text string. The display method in the choice question class displays the it overrides the display method. It displays the instance variable in the text string, so the question, and then it displays all of the choices. Consider the display method of the choice questions class. It needs to display the question and the list of choices. So text is a private instance variable in the superclass. Well, text is also displayed by the display method in the superclass. So how do we access it to print it with the question? Call the display method from the superclass. From the subclass, preface it with the name super. So if we say super.display, it will explicitly go up to the superclass, run that display method, and then come back. A common error is to have accidental overloading. Consider the println method for a moment. The println method accepts a string. You can also print something that isn't a string. That's an overloaded method if it has different parameter lists. Two methods of the same name with different parameter lists is the definition of overloading. Overriding is when you redefine a superclass method in the subclass. So when you create a method in the subclass that has the same name and same parameter list, we call that a method signature. Has the same method signature as the method in the superclass. That's called overriding. So overloading and overriding are separate, but both deal with methods, so it's easy to confuse them. If you intend to override but change parameters, you will be overloading an inherited method and not overriding it. So forgetting to use the word super, keyword super, when invoking a superclass method, for example, if we assume that manager inherits from employee and get salary is an overridden method of the employee class, when we have manager.getSalary, it includes the additional bonus. So if we say public double get salary, double base salary equals get salary, well, wait a second, which get salary is being called in that line? It's calling the get salary method that it is in. So it's going to call itself. And so it's never going to end. That's called infinite recursion. And recursion is a topic we haven't gotten to yet. So you don't want it calling itself. You want to call it in the superclass. So you have to say super dot get salary. Calling the superclass constructor. Constructors are not inherited per se. So we have to call them explicitly if we want to run them from a subclass constructor. When we call the superclass constructor from the subclass, it must be the first thing that we do. So the very first line of the constructor in the subclass must call the superclass constructor, and we do so by using the keyword super and followed by parentheses and any parameters that may be required by the constructor in the superclass. So here's an example. If we have recall our constructor has to be public, no return type, not even void, same name as the class, followed by parentheses and the parameter lists, if any. And then the very first thing we need to do in our subclass is call the superclass constructor. And then we can go on with whatever else it is that we have to do. Looking at the choice question example, we call super question text, and then we say choices equals new array list. So we create a new array list for our choices, even though we haven't populated it yet.